Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. If we haven't met yet, I'm Sally. I'm so glad you're here, especially for this topic, because this is information that I think every single woman needs to be aware of for the sake of making an informed decision about her own body. If you happen to be a guy watching this video, please don't run away. I think this is super important information for you as well, because although the burden of contraception tends to fall on the woman, it is something that has effects for both of y'all, and both man and woman. And to be blunt, in caring for your partner, I think it's something that you should be concerned with, especially when we start talking about the effects that hormonal contraception can have on the body. And that's kind of disclaimer number one, or clarification number one, is I am talking specifically about hormonal contraception, kind of grouping the copper IUD in here because it has negative effects of its own. But I'm not going to be really talking to that specifically because I don't feel that I know enough about it as its own thing. So that's what I'm talking about. This is a video that I've been wanting to film for a very long time, honestly, since before I started my YouTube channel. And it's one of those things that really made me want to start a YouTube channel because I don't think enough people are talking about it. And like I said at the start, this is information that I think every single woman should have access to for the sake of making that informed decision. So here we are. I have, kind of put it off because I've been wanting to do the best possible job approaching the topic, but I've realized that my perfectionism is not going to help with anything. I just need to sit down, have this conversation. And so my approach is going to be, first of all, kind of telling my story, how I've gotten to the point that I'm at, and then number two, sharing more broadly some of my concerns about the effects of hormonal birth control. And then in part two, this is going to be a multi-part series, we're going to talk about specifically what is the alternative, or what are the alternatives, and how those work. So please don't fear, I'm not going to leave you without solutions. That being said, I'm not a healthcare professional. I'm just someone who's really passionate about this subject, who's done a lot of research on it, and I hope that it can be a springboard for you, or a resource for you in your own research. Disclaimer number two that I want to throw out there is I am not passing judgment on anyone. You are more than welcome to choose whichever form of contraception you think is best. More power to you. However, I think it's difficult to even call it a choice when the world that we live in is keeping so much information from us. When we are not really educated about what's going on and how our bodies work, and then how these substances are affecting our bodies. So once again, that's where I come in. If you do like this content, please give this video a thumbs up. Super helpful to me in order to keep doing this, keep putting these videos out here. And also don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Whew, okay, a lot of talking here. We're gonna jump into my story. So all throughout my life growing up, my parents were pretty open with me about conversations of reproductive health, we will say. And my mom was open about some of her experiences with, hormones and, how they affected her. Also, when I was probably early high school, if I'm, remembering correctly, I got really passionate about health and wellness. It was always something that I was interested in, but I think at that point in my life, it became more of, an objective in and of itself outside of just, living an active life and being a kid. At that point, I discovered a few YouTubers who I got really into. The ones that specifically come to mind it was Ellen Fisher, Hannah McNeely, there's Sarah Lemkis, Kate Flowers, all of whom happen to be vegan YouTubers. And if you've watched any of my other content, you will know I do not subscribe to that diet or that lifestyle. But they still had a lot of information that was super helpful. And Ellen Fisher and Hannah McNeely in particular, I love them so much. Never stop watching those videos, or I'll never stop watching their videos. I think they're just awesome, but I'll stop gushing. Anyways, all of these YouTubers had gotten questions about what do you do for birth control? And they filmed videos kind of approaching the topic or addressing the topic, which I'm so appreciative of looking back, because from a young age that helped me to realize, there are multiple ways to approach this without just having to take a pill or get an implant or an IUD or something like that. So it was at that point that I really, again, began to learn about my options. And then right before I was leaving for college, kind of in that summer, I remember my mom having a conversation with me where she just said, "Hey, Sally, you need to be really careful about birth control if a doctor is prescribing it for you, not even in terms of contraception." I had always been very upfront about my personal conviction of saving myself for marriage, so that really wasn't even a factor. But specifically, like being prescribed birth control for something else other than contraception. So for acne, for other reproductive quote unquote issues or concerns, she said, just please talk to me first before you get on anything like that, because there's more going on with those things than generally, is presented or generally the healthcare professionals are even aware of. Sure enough, come 1 or 2 years later, I faced the first situation in which that was presented as an option to me. I was having pretty intense ovulation pain, which really is not out of the ordinary. It's just something I had not experienced before. But in retrospect, it makes sense, especially given hormonal changes that just happened throughout that point in your life, and also with my diet, with how much stress I was under. Pretty typical thing to experience. But I've always been admittedly somewhat of a hypochondriac, and so I went to campus health just to say, hey, I have this concern, can we just talk about it to make sure that everything's okay? Because of course I was thinking PCOS, endometriosis, being myself, like, oh, years down the road I don't want this to cause an issue. Now thankfully it was neither of those issues, but pretty much what the doctor told me is, there's nothing wrong with you, we can give you birth control that will stop ovulation, and then you won't experience this pain anymore because you literally will not be ovulating. And in that moment specifically, I'm like, oh my gosh. So the answer to my problem, according to you, isn't like, let's get to the root cause of it, rather like, let's stop ovulation, which I'll get more into shortly. But incredibly frustrating when I've learned now that there really are hormonal factors that are going to affect things like painful periods and ovulation that you can control. And when the healthcare professionals are literally just telling you, oh, here's a pill, let's cover it up. And if I'm not mistaken, there was also a second instance when I came in, I think due to, finding like a lump in my breast, that I also went to the doctor just to have it checked out. Can't remember the exact details about this, but again, same option here. We'll put you on birth control. We really don't think there's an issue here, but if we suppress your hormones in this way, it will likely, be resolved. So needless to say, this kind of encouraged me to double down on my own research about hormonal health and alternatives to birth control. So now that I've given the context of my story, how I've gotten to, hold the position that I do now, I want to dive into how hormonal birth control works and why I'm concerned about the effects it has on the body. So hormonal birth control works by putting artificial hormones in the body and disrupting or preventing ovulation. What this means is that you have no sex hormones of your own. I have a notebook here that I'm going to be consulting because I wrote out notes beforehand, just want to make sure I'm getting this stuff right. But on that last note, you have no sex hormones of your own. You have steroid drugs instead, essentially. When I'm talking about sex hormones, there are 4 that are primarily involved in the female cycle, but there are 2 that are mainly coming into play right here. So you've got progesterone and you've got estrogen. The artificial hormones that are being put into your body do not have the same benefits as real, regular hormones. So why do we want to avoid suppressing ovulation? Ovulation is what allows for progesterone production. Also, just looking at my notes here, it's also preventing, or to suppress ovulation is preventing menstruation, which is important for getting rid of excess iron, which is kind of the other side of the coin. And this is something that people are dealing with years after they're off birth control. I just need to kind of explain here that the bleed that you are having when you are on birth control if you are having one, is not the same thing as a true period. It's not having the same effect on your body. But let's talk a little bit about the concern specifically of that prevention of progesterone production. So something that we live in a world of dealing with essentially is estrogen dominance. Like we talked about, we got estrogen, we got progesterone. What tends to happen is that we have estrogen of different forms all around us. It's in the products we use, or even if it's not directly in those products we use, it's causing a reaction with the body that is creating more estrogen, or it's binding to those receptors. I'm going to try and stay away from the nitty gritty of that because, again, I don't think I can do it justice. But the point is we tend to be bombarded with a lot of excess estrogen, whereas progesterone, on the other hand, is something that is difficult often to produce enough of. This is something that becomes evident when you look at many people's infertility struggles. And again, I know that's an incredibly sensitive topic and a multifaceted topic. But a big contributor to it is that if women do not have enough progesterone, number one, they will not be able to successfully get pregnant. And then number two, if they are able to get pregnant, what will happen is they can't sustain essentially the embryo long enough for implantation to successfully happen. So that's a big problem, just talking about long-term fertility health, especially given that not only does birth control cause estrogen dominance while you are on the pill itself, using the IUD itself, but often this persists years after you're actually off it. Estrogen dominance also, if we're looking about other issues, increases your risk of breast cancer, blood clots, stroke, etc. That has to do with estrogen, but that also has to do with the artificial hormones that the birth control is providing, which happen to be endocrine disruptors. And of course, you've most likely heard about some concerns people have in terms of increased weight gain, decreased libido, painful sex when on birth control. That all has largely to do with these artificial hormones being endocrine disruptors, and then the fact that you're super estrogen dominant. One other kind of side note on this is that when we're looking at issues like PCOS and endometriosis, again, not a healthcare professional, so please take this with a grain of salt, but my understanding about that is oftentimes there is an underlying issue of estrogen dominance at play. And so when you are, using this pill as a quote unquote treatment, even if it's able to suppress symptoms during the short term, the fact that it's perpetuating that estrogen dominance can actually cause a lot more issues down the road. If you are an expert on this, have more information on exactly how that works, I would love to hear what you have to say in the comments. Please never hesitate to drop it there. I just ask that we're able to be considerate and respectful of each other in that place. So in addition to that estrogen dominance, what can happen is you see screwed up minerals and gut health. I mentioned a moment or so ago that what can happen because of menstruation not properly occurring is you see increased iron. In addition to seeing increased iron, you will often see decreased antioxidants, B vitamins, magnesium, selenium, zinc, and vitamin C. And you will also see often some negative effects on gut health because these are messing up the hormones, the endocrine disruptors are messing up the balance of bacteria in our intestines. This increases inflammation, and then that can actually lead to or perpetuate autoimmune diseases of the gut. So something to be aware of, something that people often struggle with years after they're off birth control because that's such a delicate balance. And especially when you start tweaking with those minerals, it's such a balancing game. If your iron is way too high and you don't have enough of other minerals, you're not able to utilize them properly. Highly suggest, again, you check out the podcast I am listing below, specifically the one from the Are You Menstrual podcast. They have an awesome episode that goes in depth on minerals. I'm trying to think if I am missing anything else here. I don't think so, although I know it's a much deeper topic than that. But just to kind of summarize, hormonal birth control works by preventing ovulation. Often this is causing estrogen dominance, which is something that many women already struggle with. Estrogen dominance can actually decrease the amount of progesterone in our bodies, or at least in terms of the ratio, make it so that progesterone is not sufficient to support our hormone cycles as they should be. And down the road, if a woman is looking to get pregnant, decreased progesterone is a big issue when it comes to being able to get pregnant and then being able to carry that pregnancy to the point of implantation and even further. I'm gonna go ahead and stop here, but in next week's video, we're gonna take a dive into what it actually looks like to not use hormonal birth control, how our bodies work, and how we can work with them to support our natural cycles and still prevent pregnancy. So keep an eye out for that. And I really appreciate you watching. I hope this wasn't too rambly. Like I said, I've been kind of like perfectionistic about how to approach the topic, and I just had to rip off the bandage to be like, it is better that you just talk about it. If we can start a conversation, then obsess over it for too long first. Excited for next week's video though, because that's something I practice day in and day out. So I will see you then. Until next time, bye y'all.